Hi, I'm Anna Rose Dumber from MISTI, and I'm here with Joyce from Global Languages, and we are taking part in Career Exploration Week with CAPD, and we're really excited to share with you because we think a big part of career exploration is, taking that really big leap out of your comfort zone with language and cultural exchange and international experience, and how that can really change and just impact the trajectory of your career in unexpected and positive ways. And so we have a panel here moderated by my MIT Chile and other South American countries managing director Eduardo Rivera.
I'm really happy to be here today with all of you, and especially discussing and talking about this topic that is so close to me. As you can hear my accent, I'm not a native speaker. Learning English and then later German and Catalan changed my life, and I have had the opportunity to live, study, and get to know so many people in 5 different countries where I have lived. So I'm really excited to be here today to chat with all of you about your experiences and how intercultural experiences and language has impacted your lives.
So hi everyone, my name is Marwa. So like Eduardo, I'm also international. So I'm originally from a very tiny island in the Middle East called Bahrain. It's very tiny that you actually need a magnifying glass if you're going to see it on the map. I graduated from MIT in 2020, majored in mechanical engineering, and right now I'm also a graduate student within the Department of Mechanical Engineering, but my lab is actually in the EECS department, where I'm working with Professor Stephanie Mueller in the field of human-computer interaction. During my undergraduate time at MIT, I took Japanese as a global language that I concentrated in. And even after taking Japanese at MIT, I continued with higher level Japanese at Harvard. And I was also very fortunate to participate in MISTI Japan in 2018 and also take part in MISTI Arab World in 2020.
My name is Isaac Lozada. I'm American of Latino descent. My mom is Chicana, she's Mexican American. My dad is from Puerto Rico. I am class of 2011, so I'm probably a bit older than a lot of the group here. I studied environmental engineering at that time, and since then I've always sort of worked in things related to urban development policy, transportation policy. Currently, I'm working with the largest developer in Mexico City, trying to build a more accessibly priced rental housing. While at MIT, I did 2 years, I did 2 summers with MISTI India. There was no language requirement at this point in time, but I did try to pick up some Hindi or Urdu at that point. And I also did MISTI Mexico for 2 summers towards the end of my MIT career. Definitely a game changer in terms of the way just like my life has panned out since. I did do undergraduate Spanish at MIT, and I also did Spanish for business at Harvard. I did 1.5 years of Arabic also at Harvard, and the Hindi Urdu was also at Harvard.
Good afternoon and good evening and good morning to some of you. I'm Piper. Oh my goodness, I'm forgetting all the numbers already, but I'm a course 16 aerospace engineering. I graduated in 2018, and I also minored in Russian and Eurasian studies when I was there. Now I'm actually a 4th-year PhD student at the University of Michigan, still in aerospace engineering and slowly working towards a graduate certificate in Russian studies. When I was at MIT, I was super fortunate to participate both in MISTI Kazakhstan as well as MISTI Russia. And those were, like the panelists who have spoken before me have said, just absolutely life-changing. And I'm very thankful I got to participate in both of those.
I'm William. I'm an MIT class of 2018 and 2019. I did my bachelor's in computer science and minor economics in 2018. Then I continued with my MEng in EECS, concentrating in artificial intelligence. And in these recent years, I've had a couple of work experiences, mostly concentrating within the renewable energy industries. So my master's thesis is on smart charging programs for electric vehicles. I worked at Tesla and then at a renewable energy company in Spain through MISTI Spain. And now more recently, I'm working as a software engineer at Apple in California. And during MIT, I really loved the offerings that MIT had, whether through language or through international experiences. So I'm a huge advocate of MISTI and of language learning at MIT in general. And so I took a few language areas. So I took French in high school and I wanted to continue that into college. So I took a conversation class my freshman year. Then I was sort of done with that and I wanted to learn another language. So MIT was offering advanced Portuguese for Spanish speakers. And so I took that class, then spent a summer in Brazil through MISTI, then did actually another experience in MISTI Brazil, my senior IAP. And between my senior year and beginning of my MEng, I did a summer in Spain that I mentioned previously. And I think the last main language experience was I took Japanese 1 during my MEng IAP because I was always interested in that. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Hello, everyone. It's early. I feel crazy. My name is Josh. I graduated MIT class of 2018, course 2 of basically a minor in Chinese. I started studying Chinese my second year up to graduation. My first experience in China was actually through Professor Claire Concisen. She took me to like study Beijing opera for like some winter, January 2017. And then after graduating from MIT, I did the Swordsman Scholarship Program, which is a year-long master's degree in Beijing. And then after that, I got some job at some small company in Shenzhen, basically doing project management using Mandarin to manage factories and other engineers. And now I work for Apple, which is funny because there are 2 Apple people here. But I work for Apple managing the product development process for the front cam in iPhones. So, hello.
What role has foreign language and cross-cultural experience played in your career path? Adding to that first question, like the importance, maybe you can tell us at the end, how did you end up? What sparked your interest for language that you end up studying and developing so well?
I guess like when it comes to Japanese, it probably started when I was very, very young. When I was like in elementary school, we used to have a lot of these like cartoons that are like on screen. They were of course like dubbed in Arabic. But I guess that was like kind of like the beginning that caught like my interest as a kid, because I was able to see like glimpses of Japanese culture through those like anime cartoons that for some reason, because of the dubbing, felt very close to home as well. I remember one thing that we always like joke about is that even when they were dubbing, they were changing all of the names from Japanese to Arabic. Which was kind of funny because we kind of like subconsciously thought those characters were from our region as well. But I guess like that was kind of like the start. And because the continuation of those cartoons weren't there, and I think like with the internet, I was kind of like curious to see what the continuation was. And that was like my gateway to Japanese, because to me, Japanese kind of felt like, because no one else at home could speak it, something like very personal to me. I kind of developed a personal connection where, you know, and not only am I learning all of these words, but also at the same time, you know, I'm learning parts of the culture. And I think the more that I started learning Japanese, the more that I kind of come to realize how beautiful the language is. And it kind of like diverted then from a love for, you know, cartoons as a kid to love for the language itself and for the culture itself. And I guess that's kind of like what made me continue wanting to learn more of the language and wanting to get better at it. And I think definitely being in Japan as well and talking like to different people like in Japanese has made like communication much more easier, has made that has enabled me to also like represent either MIT, you know, or you know, my country, and you know, hopefully try to bridge the gap or like act as a gap between 3 different regions, which are, you know, Japan and the Middle East and also the US through MIT. My background is mechanical engineering, but when I did MISTI Japan, actually, my internship wasn't related to mechanical engineering at all. I interned in a gaming company in Tokyo. And that kind of like required me before even like starting the internship to do like a lot of like self-studying and kind of like gaining some skills that would be like beneficial to the internship. And I guess like Japan kind of like has this culture where it's a lot about like learning while you're on the job. And I felt like just being there and given the opportunity to work in a field that's very different from mine, which is like mechanical engineering, and the very positive experience that I had actually made me realize very early on that I'm very interested in interdisciplinary fields where I'm actually using skills that are not necessarily just purely mechanical, but actually things where I'm combining, you know, design principles that I actually learned from my degree in mechanical engineering with computer science and electrical engineering. And when I was applying to graduate school, that experience basically is what made me decide to go into human-computer interaction as a research field, rather just go directly into something that is traditionally considered within the Department of Mechanical Engineering. And I think, like, as I said, like actually realizing that very early on through hands-on experience and given a project in Japan where I was given the sole responsibility to work on from scratch to working prototype, actually made me realize that, because I went through the whole process of brainstorming to like, you know, having others like check my product or like play test. So I was very fortunate with that experience. And yeah, it definitely changed a lot in terms of future decisions.
Spanish was sort of default. I just always wanted to work it out. And like I said, it was always pretty functional, but I did kind of refine it while at MIT. I think the more interesting one is probably like, why did I choose Arabic and Urdu, Hindi? Arabic was similar to Joshua, kind of just, you know, you just look at the demographics globally and it was like, well, what languages are most spoken? And yeah, I mean, Arabic was like number 2 and number 3, obviously with an abundance of very different dialects, which are sort of not very intelligible to each other. But I chose that. Sort of a friend just kind of dragged me into it over at Harvard, and I fell in love with it. It's not the easiest language to learn as an English speaker. It's very challenging, but it does open up a lot of geography to you. I think in my case, it was the benefit of sort of physical ambiguity. So there's sort of like that ethnic ambiguity, you can always kind of play to your advantage. So if you travel or stuff, people kind of assume you're local. And I think that makes it easier to kind of blend in. And Hindi Urdu just felt appropriate. I did do 2 summers with MISTI India, and though it was not a requirement, I mean, Hindi is one of the lingua francas of the Indian subcontinent. I just felt it was appropriate to at least learn the basics. And I think in my case, it's very self-evident. Like I today live in Mexico City. I've now been here for 10 years, which is 2.5 times longer than I lived anywhere else in my life growing up. And that's obviously you know, made possible by the fact that I do speak Spanish fluently. And that was something that was accelerated by my time both at MIT and the MISTI internship program. No, I mean, after I interned originally with the Secretary of Environment for a summer and fall in 2010. And I just fell spectacularly in love with the city, with the work I was doing. I also met my partner at that point in time and finished up school. And I just hopped right back to MIT, to Mexico City via another internship that was also fostered by the MISTI program in the urban development sector. And so I've been here since and made a life happen that wouldn't have been obviously possible without that language ability.
And in your daily life, do you use English at all, or is mostly 99% of your daily life is in Spanish now?
It varies. I'd say my previous job just a year ago, I was working with a US private equity firm doing real estate here. And I'd say a good 60% of my day-to-day was in English. There's a sort of an arbitrage opportunity being someone who speaks both languages well. You know, if you're working with American, Canadian, European investors, they just, for better or for worse, they just, you know, feel much more comfortable speaking to someone who has an American accent, and just, you know, it brings down a lot of barriers. And so I definitely was using English a lot. In my current job, it's a fully Mexican company. It's much more local, a bit less institutional. So I'd say my English is a bit less, but I I do have a very active social network, which is very international, I guess. And so that in that case, I do continue to use a lot of English day to day. That being said, my English does get worse every single year, I have noticed. Yeah.
First language I really learned was French in high school, and then it was really just because it was the only elective that was offered at my high school in terms of languages. And so I had a good like 4 or 5 years of that. And when I got to MIT, I wanted to try something else. So I looked at the course catalog. I think it was actually suggested by an upperclassman that I was friends with that was also from Puerto Rico. And I think, yeah, the main opportunity was that course that existed, the accelerated Portuguese for Spanish speakers, that you would take Portuguese 1 and 2 in just 1 semester. And I thought that was like an excellent way to just accelerate my knowledge into another language, especially like maximizing that similarity between Spanish and Portuguese as languages. And so yeah, I really liked the experience with the language, and yeah, just continued it with, there was a music course that was offered at MIT. So learning about Brazilian music and culture was a very fun way to balance my hardcore engineering classes and technical, done them there. And I think the last language I learned at MIT, Japanese, it was, okay, so I realized, okay, I know English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. These are all like European Romance languages. I don't really have a foothold in Asia or in other parts of the world. So I was like, okay, I have to learn something else that will allow me to get some presence in other regions. So Japanese, so the Tokyo Olympics were coming up, and being in Brazil, actually, I was able to see the Rio 2016 Olympics and like be a spectator for the opening ceremonies. And yeah, this really motivated me to want to attend and be like a volunteer for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. So yeah, I was really motivated to learn Japanese. Sadly, they didn't accept any overseas volunteers. But yeah, that was, I think, the main reasons why I studied those languages. Yeah, so I think I would just summarize this, that learning languages or cross-cultural experiences have really widened my perspective of the world, really. So I'm from Puerto Rico, and so a place in Latin America, but even being from there, I didn't really realize. So when people think of Latin America, they usually just think, oh, Spanish speaking cultures. But no, like there's actually this huge side of that's known as Brazil, where it's Portuguese speaking, and it has a huge cultural influence, not only in the continent, but also like economically and throughout the world. You see Brazilians everywhere, for better, for worse, whatever you want. But yeah, it's really been learning Portuguese and having that experience in Brazil allowed me to form valuable connections with people that I still stay close to today. And so like also through like different experiences I've had professionally. So I worked at the UN once, and they didn't have someone on my team that spoke Portuguese or also French that was needed this like background in the project that we were working with. And that just allowed me to step in and be more comfortable and be a point of contact for people I was working with. And now in Zoom times or this pandemic, it's been very useful in allowing me to meet other people. So I started my current role at Apple remotely, and it's just been that much harder to get to know people on a more personal level. So knowing Portuguese and other languages has allowed me to set up coffee chats with people in the Brazil office, set up chats with people in Paris and all across the world that Apple really has a huge presence in. So yeah, I think it's been really instrumental in, for me really recently, just getting to know other people in these more, these times in which contact with other people is harder to make.
What sparked my interest in Chinese was extremely practical, actually. I just looked at like the world population. And I'm like, okay, if the list of languages I should learn, it's Chinese and then Arabic and then Spanish, because then I can probably talk to anyone. So the Chinese came first, and the economic development, and just kind of looking at what society was doing at my time in MIT. But I think along the way, I found that the process of learning new languages, it was kind of a lens for me learning about myself, reflecting on, my cultural habits that are different from the cultural habits I'm learning through speaking this language. So it became a really kind of immersive and interesting process, I guess. I just found this experience of being outside the US, getting a variety of new opinions, new exposures. It's been great for understanding, contextualizing my American experience and kind of where we are in the world. Regards to career, and I'll be thinking about either joining a multinational that is leveraging kind of the Chinese development, Chinese manufacturing industry to do their products, or maybe doing my own type of cross-border company that like also leverages that. I would also say I'm thinking a lot about kind of developing countries and how I think they'll probably be looking more towards China as development model and less towards America, which would mean that like countries like that are based in Latin America, based in Africa, will also have an interest in people with my expertise.
I think I first sort of stumbled upon Russian almost by accident, I suppose. In high school, I actually had a chance to go to Moscow, Korolov specifically, the cradle of the space race, in high school for the International Space Olympics, which was a delightfully nerdy competition in which I took like a bunch of science and math tests with students from all over the world. And it was absolutely foundational in, developing myself as a person and figuring out who I was. And so, that was my first real experience abroad, other than, Canada and Niagara Falls, my first real time experiencing a culture that was pretty different than our own American culture, or excuse me, my own American culture. And I latched onto it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And the more I started learning about it, the more I really just fell in love with the language and the culture. And here I am today. And it turns out being in aerospace as well, it works out really nicely studying Russian. Chinese is also a very big language in aerospace, but Russian is as well, spoken a lot on the International Space Station, and Roscosmos is a really big player in the space industry. And so I'm crossing my fingers that I'll be able to use it in my own career one day, hopefully as an astronaut, maybe back here on Earth, hopefully both, ideally. And yeah, it's been opening a lot of great doors for me in that sense. I know a number of folks in the Russian department back at MIT, I see Maria out in the audience there, organized a really cool talk with the astronaut Mike Fink. And I had the opportunity to be a part of that because of my experience with Russian and aerospace as well. I've been able to intern or volunteer for visa reasons at the Museum of Cosmonautics in Russia in Moscow. And all of those experiences have just been so cool. Just, yeah, really awesome, both professionally and personally.
You would have to convince a student to take one of the opportunities while at MIT and therefore 2 years at MIT. And very few reasons. What would you tell him, her, they?
Oh man, I did 2 MISTIs, my junior and senior IAPs. And honestly, I don't like framing it as a negative, but one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't do MISTI all 4 IAPs because it was just absolutely fantastic. I got so much out of it. And it was just a blast. I did MISTIs where I was volunteering, teaching workshops at local middle and high schools. And it was so rewarding to work with like the younger kids. And I got to teach them about stuff I loved, like space and airplanes and rockets. And then I got to practice the language and, laugh at myself as they laughed with me when I made really silly grammar mistakes and things like that. I got to see the world and travel across these other countries. And I guess the thing it always reminds me of is in aerospace, maybe some of you have heard of this before, but astronauts often talk about the overview effect, where when you're up in orbit over the Earth, you can't see borders. You just see one peaceful, beautiful, our little blue dot, our planet Earth. And I think like traveling abroad, learning another language, taking part in these international experiences is a really good way to catch a glimpse of that overview effect from here on Earth.
Resonate a lot with the point that you mentioned about like practicing the language and also at the same time doing something that's very meaningful, whether it's giving back to the community or, probably like learning a new skill or like developing like career-wise. And I think MISTI actually, joins these two things because first of all, you're put in an environment where you're actually kind of forced to practice the language that you really, really like on a daily basis. And I think that was true for me also in Japan because I was working in a Japanese company where everyone was comfortable speaking Japanese, but not everyone necessarily was comfortable like using English. So even when it came to like, communicating technical details, I gained that experience because I was put in that situation. Whereas if I had, interned in an American company, sure, I would have developed my skills from a career perspective, but not necessarily, getting like the best of both worlds for, my language skills and also my career skills. And I think another point is I know that I, as an international student, there's sometimes like a lot of things that we assume about other cultures. And I think even when I come here to MIT, I know others, including my friends, assume things about my culture. And I think, going to a country, right, and experiencing being around the people, being around people from that country can help change your perspective and make you more empathetic, make you more aware of what the reality could be. And I think, MISTI gives us the opportunity to actually do that as well.
So I think it's a little dependent on, of course, what you actually study and what sort of your career expectations are. But there are definitely fields of study and work that are just doing much or have a lot more promise in certain markets. And so, in my case, environmental engineering, sort of urban planning. It's not to say that US cities are the best planned cities in the world, but there's probably a lot more need for better urban development in sort of much more rapidly growing, much more chaotic cities and sort of emerging markets across the planet. And so without these language skills, you kind of just cut yourself off from that opportunity. And having made the jump here, definitely I think I have given myself an edge in terms of a lot more exposure. And a lot more growth. Like I've been able to ride the wave of growth that I don't think would have occurred in, for example, US market, where you just kind of don't see this sort of momentum behind any sort of urban development in any US market, for example. And I think this, specifically in urban planning, you could go anywhere in Latin America and Asian cities. China is a spectacular example. They're just completely redoing their entire country in so many different ways right now. South Asia, of course, and so. There may be, depending on the field of study, so that those opportunities that without the language and of course without MISTI, we wouldn't be able to make that connection with.
I guess being in the MIT circle and feeling like people are still making presumptions about you, I would say that learning language is one of the ways I think which we can meaningfully immerse ourselves in something outside of what we grew up knowing. Which is to say, learning Chinese just gave me a perspective about, again, it's like developing the second part of yourself. In the language, you have your own personality. And I know one of my frustrations at MIT was also that I felt like, we're supposed to be surrounded by the smartest people in the world. We're supposed to have all this capacity for understanding and empathy and impact, but we fundamentally don't understand each other, right? In certain cases. So I feel like learning language is one of those things that breaks down the borders. I know, at least for me, like, you don't see many people who look like this in China, but just being able to communicate effectively, whether it's with my job or with meeting a person at a social event, like really changes the experience. So it goes from you kind of being like the American floating around society to you being able to say like, oh, okay, you have this nuanced opinion about this particular thing, or, oh, okay, this is what you like to do in your free time. So yeah, I think it's had a big impact on my ability to relate to other people, and I would also say that the immigrant experience is something I can't quite understand as a Black American, but now I do as a Black American in China.
For me, I feel that it's more on the like relationship point of view. So when I went to Brazil the first time, I was kind of on the fence of like whether to live on my own apartment with friends or live with a host family. And I decided to live with a host family to get that more immersion experience, let's say. And I was living in a host family where the mother was learning English and the father was learning Spanish. And I was the one learning Portuguese, and my Portuguese was better than their English or Spanish. So it was just a really, like, I think a word is like enriching experience where we, every day for dinner, we learned about each other, learned about our language, learned about where we came from. And yeah, I just learned really so much and became like exposed to many different things in Brazilian and Lusophone culture in general that I think I would have generalized as just general like Latin America if I hadn't been there. If I hadn't been there, and I would have thought Brazilian culture is more similar, but it's really a whole different beast. And yeah, I think that really puts put it on the map of that difference and those interesting nuances in culture that many of us take for given, especially looking from the outside.
Is there any particular areas of international opportunities or areas of growth in your field? So disconnected to what advice would you give to any student which has international interests? If you can tell us in a few words.
I guess in terms of human-computer interaction or HCI, I think just generally in research, there's a lot of room for international communication or international cooperation, starting with conferences, for example. Two of the very big conferences that we have are like Chi and WIST, and they kind of rotate hosting countries. So in last year, 2021, it was hosted in Japan, and this, like, in upcoming years, it's going to be like either Germany or the US. So there's definitely a lot of room for meeting people from different institutions and actually putting your international experiences and your language knowledge to use within the field or scope of the research community. And that can also like push research forward and actually contribute to the world in a very positive way.
What stage the panelists felt comfortable in their learned languages? What was the moment you realized you had a practical command of the language, and what experiences were most critical for you to reach that stage?
I can answer this question. I think it's very easy to be self-critical of ourselves when we're speaking in another language that we probably don't use on a daily basis. I know it happens to me when I'm speaking Japanese, especially if I haven't used it like for a while, that I try to wonder like, oh, did I use like correct grammar? Am I using the correct words? And things like that. But I think when I was actually put in the situation of being in Japan and using Japanese on a daily basis, that voice inside of my head that was very critical kind of disappeared. So I think it just comes with, using the language a lot and being okay with the fact that you are going to make mistakes, but it's fine as long as the other person can understand what you're saying. So that's like my advice.
Would you say that came though in that first experience you had working at the gaming company in Tokyo?
That definitely boosted my confidence, yes. So it did play a very big role, but I think also, talking to other people. I know MIT has like the language exchange program as well, where you partner with other people in the community that want to practice that language. So I remember during my freshman year at MIT, I also met a partner who goes to Boston University that was also practicing their Japanese, and just talking to one another, not really caring if we're making mistakes or saying things that are correct. And that actually helped a lot. Yeah.
For me, it was when I was able to eat at a dinner table, identify what a fork, knife, and spoon were, and ask what the food, to ask someone to pass the food and to know what that was.
Distinguishing point was being able to be in public and know what everyone's saying or vaguely what the topic is, and like being comfortable because I'm like, I know what you guys all say, you don't think I know, but I know, and I think that only comes from actually having to work, write, and speak in the language in like a professional setting. Or it's not, while MIT definitely, the language programs gave me the foundation from which I can grow, it's actually speaking the language 24/7, listening to it 24/7 that allowed it to click, you know, and like Mara was saying earlier, to be able to dream in that language. It took being in that environment for a period of time. So I would say that's also pretty important. And with regards to, I guess, the opportunities for mechanical engineers learning languages in the world, the myriad, there's so many opportunities, you know, at least regards to China. This is the manufacturing hub of the world still, you know, that it's being exported a bit to Vietnam and to Thailand. We're going through that process now, but it is still like every major multinational American corporation has a presence in Shenzhen. They're doing some type of research and development. So there's so many opportunities to be found here for sure.
And then as Marwa said, basically don't sell yourself short if just because you think you don't speak the language or understand it spectacularly. I think honestly with just very functional, the basics of the language tends to go a really, really long way. At the end of the day, all of us here in this chat are blessed with the fact that we speak English, which is the lingua franca of almost everything in the world. And so that, you know, most things will come to always default into that direction. So if you can at least speak enough to communicate the basics and other things, like you're pretty much all set, I think, wherever you're going to be.
I actually had my Russian class earlier today, and I was really struggling with it today. And so, yeah, you know, like it's okay to not know the language perfectly. I think, yeah, don't be too critical on yourselves. It's about being able to function with the language and not knowing it perfectly. But I guess I would add, in terms of when I felt most practiced with it, or when I knew I had reached that point, was when, after a summer I spent, my first summer at Michigan. I guess technically it was in Moscow. I did a language study abroad. And looking back on it, there's some conversations where I can't remember if they were in English or in Russian. And that's when I knew, like, okay, I must have been speaking it pretty well at that point then. And yeah, so definitely I think for me, immersing myself in that environment was really critical. And in terms of, opportunities with aerospace and speaking other languages, yeah, there's also so many. Dream big, go out and get them. There's a lot in, like, with Russian language, there's a lot with Chinese language, and a lot of European languages as well, but I'm not as familiar with those.
So thank you so much. One of the great things about this opportunity to connect with people from around the world is that we are reminded how important languages, intercultural experiences are, but also how lucky we all are to be to share this opportunity to understand and speak in different worlds. I think, Joshua, you mentioned that, yes, we're basically different worlds, and we are different people at different times with our languages. So thank you so much, and hope to see you again.